names carried more weight in the Texas borderlands during the blood-soaked years of 1877 than Jeremiah Three Fingers Fletcher, not for the digits missing from his left hand, though that tale was told in every saloon from El Paso to Laredo, but for executing what historians would later call the Valentine's Day Reckoning. That meticulously calculated ambush left 19 of the Southwest's most vicious outlaws dead in a narrow pass of the Diablo Mountains, their bodies arranged in a perfect, line-like fence posts marking the boundary between lawlessness and civilization. But that was before he vanished, before rumors of his death spread through border towns faster than a prairie fire, and before he chose the quiet life of a watchmaker in the dusty cattle town of Redemption Creek, Colorado. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Legend of Three Fingers. Fletcher isn't just about bullets and blood. It's about a man with vision sharp enough to hit a silver dollar at 400 yards and patience cold enough to wait 3 days without food or water for the perfect shot. A man who proved that the most dangerous weapon on the frontier wasn't a quick draw or a steady hand, but the calculating mind that guided them. Unlike the rough-hewn boomtowns that dotted the Colorado Territory with their hastily erected shacks and temporary dreams, Redemption Creek had grown into something resembling permanence. The cattle drives that gave the town its economic lifeblood had attracted not just cowboys and cattle barons, but families, merchants, and craftsmen looking to build meaningful lives in the shadow of the mighty Sangre de Cristo Mountains. 2. Town itself stood as a testament to frontier persistence. Its wooden buildings, once simple and functional, were gradually being replaced with sturdy brick and stone structures that whispered promises of generations to come. The wide main street, recently lined with wooden boardwalks, hosted a respectable array of establishments. Mason's General Store, the Redemption Creek Courier newspaper office, the Cattleman's Trust Bank, and the Silverton Hotel, whose newly installed glass windows gleamed in the autumn sun like pools of liquid gold. On this particular fall morning, as dawn painted the mountain peaks in shades of amber and crimson, Jeremiah Fletcher went about his usual routine in the watchmaker's shop he'd opened 4 years prior. The store, with its precisely arranged display of timepieces and delicate tools, had become something of an oddity in a cattle town, a shrine to precision amid the chaos of frontier life. Those who frequented Fletcher's Watches and Repairs knew its proprietor as a quiet man of extraordinary attention to detail, more likely to recommend the proper care of a pocket watch than engage in town gossip. Few would have connected the meticulous watchmaker with the legendary Lawman, who had orchestrated the deadliest single engagement in frontier justice history. Maria Vasquez, whose family ran the Copper Kettle restaurant across the street, was one of the first to notice something different about Fletcher that morning. She'd grown accustomed to his methodical habits, the way he would arrange his tools on the workbench with mathematical precision, how he would check each corner of his shop before opening, the careful way he positioned his chair to view both the entrance and the back door simultaneously. "There's something about the way he moves," she later told her father in hushed Spanish. "Like every step has been measured 3 times before he takes it, just like in the stories my grandfather told about the mountain lion hunters of Sonora." The morning crowd at Sarah Donnelly's Bluebonnet Cafe provided their own observations about the mysterious watchmaker. "Man's got military bearing," declared Thomas Jefferson Hawkins, a veteran of both Shiloh and the Apache Wars, who now served as the town's blacksmith. "The way he carries himself, the way he's always aware of the room, that ain't learned from tinkering with watches." Sarah herself had noticed other peculiarities about her regular customer. Fletcher always sat with his back to the wall, facing the door. He would order coffee but barely touch it, his attention seemingly focused on the pocket watch he was adjusting, while his eyes tracked every movement in the cafe. The Remington revolver he wore, unusual for a watchmaker, rode low on his hip, in a well-worn holster that spoke of years of intimate use. "It's his eyes that give him away," she confided to Hawkins one morning. "Too many ghosts for a man who just handles timepieces. And have you noticed when someone drops a plate or makes a sudden noise? Those eyes don't startle. They calculate, measuring distance and direction before he even turns his head." The town's sheriff, Abram Honest Abe Montgomery, had his own suspicions about the watchmaker. 20 years wearing a badge had taught him to read men like he read the sky before a storm. And something about Fletcher's careful movements and watchful eyes spoke of a man who had seen his share of violence. The way he would constantly scan his surroundings, the precise manner in which he would time his walks through town to avoid. Establishing patterns. These weren't the habits of a simple shopkeeper. The truth about Jeremiah Fletcher's identity might have remained hidden if not for the arrival of the Blackburn brothers, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had spread. Terror across 4 territories, led by the notorious Isaiah Blackburn and his 3 equally dangerous siblings, they had turned bank robbery into a brutal art form, approaching each heist with the kind of tactical savagery usually reserved for military operations. What the Blackburns couldn't have known was that their carefully planned raid on the Cattleman's Trust Bank would bring them face to face with the very man who had engineered the Valentine's Day reckoning, the lawman who had turned a narrow mountain pass into a killing ground through nothing more than patience, planning, and a perfect understanding of how desperate men behave when they believe they've cornered their prey. The first hint of trouble came on a crisp morning in late October when a stranger walked into Fletcher's shop. He was a well-dressed man who introduced himself as William Thorne, a cattle buyer from Kansas City, but Fletcher noticed the telltale signs, the way the man's coat hung awkwardly on the right side, the slight callus on his index finger where it would rest against a trigger guard, the practiced way he positioned himself to keep the door in view. "Looking for anything in particular?" Fletcher asked, his voice carrying the quiet assurance of a man who had spent years measuring his words as carefully as he measured the movements of a watch mechanism. "Heard you might have a timepiece suitable for a man of business," Thorne replied, running his fingers along the glass display case. "Got a particular interest in precision." Fletcher retrieved a gold pocket watch from a locked drawer behind his workbench, noting how the stranger's eyes darted to every corner of the shop, marking exits and potential cover. "Railroad man?" Fletcher inquired mildly. "You might say that." Thorne smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Though these days I'm more interested in diverse opportunities." As Thorne left with his purchase, Fletcher made a notation in his ledger, not of the sale, but of the man's height, build, and the distinctive way he favored his right leg when turning, details that would prove crucial in the days to come. For Jeremiah, 3 fingers, Fletcher had recognized something in Thorne that others might have missed, the look of a man conducting reconnaissance. The pieces were being set on the board, though few in Redemption Creek realized it. The quiet watchmaker with the watchful eyes had already begun his own preparations, drawing upon skills that had lain dormant but never forgotten. The legendary Lawman, who had turned a mountain pass into a tomb for 19 outlaws, was about to demonstrate once again why some men are remembered not for the speed of their draw, but for their ability to see 3 moves ahead in the deadliest game of all. The transformation of Redemption Creek from a rough cattle town into a community of substance had happened so gradually that most residents barely noticed the change. The muddy tracks that had once mired wagons hub-deep were now proper streets lined with hitching posts and water troughs that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. The tent saloons that had sprouted during the first cattle season had given way to permanent structures, each stone foundation a promise of stability in an unstable land. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. The Cattleman's Trust Bank stood as the crown jewel of this transformation. Its imposing facade of locally quarried limestone and imported hardwood doors, speaking of security and prosperity. A fortress of finance that had helped transform Redemption Creek from a simple watering hole into a commercial center for 3 counties. The bank's president, Theodore Harrington, took particular pride in the massive vault door shipped piece by piece from Chicago, its intricate locking mechanism a marvel of modern engineering. But it wasn't just the physical transformation that set Redemption Creek apart. The town had developed an unusual sophistication for a frontier settlement. The presence of Fletcher's watch shop was just one symbol of this evolution. The newly established Redemption Creek Academy, where the children of ranchers and merchants alike learned their letters alongside practical mathematics and proper elocution, spoke to the community's aspirations. The weekly poetry recitals at the Silverton Hotel's parlor had become social events of note, drawing everyone from reformed gunslingers to the wives of cattle barons. Yet beneath this veneer of civilization, observant residents noticed subtle changes in the rhythm of their town. Benjamin Howard, who ran the telegraph office with methodical efficiency, was the first to note an increase in mysterious messages passing through his wire. More traffic. In the past week than we usually see in a month, he confided to Sheriff Montgomery. And these aren't your typical cattle prices or family greetings. The sheriff had noticed other changes too. New faces appeared in town daily, which wasn't unusual for a prosperous cattle settlement. But these newcomers were different. They moved with too much purpose, watched too carefully, asked questions that seemed casual, but probed at the town's vulnerabilities. A pair of well-dressed men spent an entire afternoon in the bank, supposedly discussing investment opportunities, while their eyes mapped every corner of the building. Even the town's children sensed the change. Young Tommy Donnelly, whose mother ran the Blue Bonnet Cafe, noticed how Mr. Fletcher had begun positioning his watches differently in the shop window. Used to arrange them by size and style, Tommy told his friend Michael Vasquez. Now they're all mixed up, but he spends even more time getting them just right. What Tommy hadn't realized was that those carefully arranged timepieces now served as mirrors, reflecting movements on the street outside. Each polished watch case was positioned to give Fletcher a complete view of the approaches to his shop without ever having to look up from his workbench. The changes in Fletcher himself were subtle but significant. His daily routines, once a model of predictability, began to show careful variations. He would visit Sarah Donnelly's cafe at different times each day, though always choosing seats that offered clear views of both the bank and the street. His usual evening walks now followed irregular patterns, each route carefully chosen to observe different parts of town. Rebecca Howard, whose father owned the Redemption Creek Courier, noticed how Fletcher had begun spending more time with certain townspeople. He engaged Sheriff Montgomery in long conversations about the town's layout, discussing recent improvements to the streets and alleyways with an interest that seemed excessive for a mere shopkeeper. His questions about the new water storage tanks showed particular attention to their placement throughout town. The sheriff, for his part, found himself increasingly intrigued by Fletcher's insights. During one such conversation about the town's vulnerabilities, Montgomery was struck by the watchmaker's unusual perspective. "Interesting thing about Redemption Creek," Fletcher had remarked, gesturing toward the bank. "The way the streets are laid out reminds me of a fort I once visited in the Dakotas. Every approach visible, every retreat covered, almost like it was designed for defense." Montgomery, who had served as a scout during the early Indian campaigns, recognized the tactical assessment hidden beneath the casual observation. Seems you've given this some thought for a man who fixes watches. Fletcher's response was characteristically measured. Timepieces teach us that patterns repeat, Sheriff. The movements are always there if you know how to read them. The town's physical layout had indeed evolved in ways that would prove significant. The gradual replacement of wooden water troughs with stone ones had created natural choke points along Main Street. The new hitching posts, while providing welcome convenience, also created obstacles that could either conceal or expose depending on one's position and knowledge of their patterns. Even the location of Fletcher's shop, situated in a converted stable directly opposite the bank, seemed less random when viewed through the lens of strategy. The building's thick walls, originally designed to withstand harsh Colorado winters, could stop bullets. Its large front windows offered clear lines of sight to every major approach to the bank, while the restored loft provided an elevated position overlooking the entire street. The transformation extended to the town's residents, though few realized. They were being subtly prepared for what was to come. Fletcher's recommendations to the town council about improving water access and establishing fire brigades seemed practical enough, but each suggestion served a deeper purpose. Every new water barrel created a predictable point of cover that could either expose or shield, depending on one's position. The fire brigade's equipment, positioned at strategic intersections, could provide both emergency services and improvised barricades. Even the literary society meetings began to shift in subtle ways. Discussions of military history and strategy became more frequent, with Fletcher gently guiding conversations toward topics like defensive positions in ancient Rome or the ambush tactics of mountain fighters. He introduced works like The Art of War alongside more traditional selections, seeding ideas about tactical thinking throughout the community. The town's children, always quick to adapt, began incorporating these changes into their play. Their games of cowboys and Indians evolved to include elements of strategy and positioning. Tommy Donnelly proudly explained to his mother how he had won a game of hide-and-seek by thinking 3 shots ahead, a phrase he'd overheard during one of Fletcher's discussions with the sheriff. As October progressed, the tension in Redemption Creek built like steam in a locomotive's boiler. More strangers arrived, each carrying themselves with the coiled tension of predators studying prey. They stayed at different hotels, frequented different saloons, never acknowledging each other, yet moving with an underlying coordination that spoke of careful planning. The stranger, who called himself William Thorne, made several return visits to Fletcher's shop, each time purchasing small items while studying the town through the reflections in the watch cases. During his last visit, he paused before leaving, studying a chess set displayed in the corner. "Beautiful craftsmanship," he remarked, picking up the White King. "Though I've always preferred more practical games, chess teaches us valuable lessons," Fletcher replied, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "The importance of position, the value of patience, the art of making your opponents see exactly what you want them to see." Thorne replaced the piece with deliberate care. "Some might say it's just a game. Every game has rules, Mr. Thorne. The trick is knowing which ones you can break and which ones will break you." After Thorne left, Fletcher made another note in his ledger, not about watches sold or repairs completed, but about the way Thorne had studied the bank's reflection in the polished brass pendulum of the grandfather clock. The pieces were indeed being moved into position, though not necessarily by the hands that thought they controlled the game. As darkness fell over Redemption Creek that evening, the oil lamps cast their predictable pools of light along Main Street. But now, those pools of light and shadow had become pieces on a much larger board, and a master strategist was preparing to demonstrate why the deadliest player isn't always the one with the fastest draw, but the one who can see every possible move before the game even begins. The change in Redemption Creek began with a series of incidents that, taken individually, might have passed unnoticed in the daily rhythm of frontier life. But Jeremiah Fletcher, with eyes honed by years tracking the most dangerous outlaws across unforgiving terrain, saw the pattern forming like a constellation in the night sky. First came the cattle drive, 3 days earlier than scheduled, and half the size typically seen this time of year. Calvin Reed, the trail boss who'd been bringing herds through Redemption Creek for a decade, carried himself differently this time. His usual boisterous entry into town was replaced by a subdued arrival. His cowboys unnaturally quiet as they took up positions around town rather than making their customary rush to the saloons. "Something's off with Reed," Sheriff Montgomery remarked to Fletcher as they watched from the watchmaker's doorway. "10 years I've known that man, and he's never once passed up the chance to announce his arrival with that ridiculous silver horn of his." Fletcher nodded, his eyes noting how the cowboys had distributed themselves at key intersections. "Man's being paid for more than just moving cattle this time," he observed, his voice barely audible above the lowing of the herd. "Question is, who's paying and what's the real delivery?" The answer began to emerge the following morning when 4 well-dressed men arrived on the eastbound stage. They took rooms at separate establishments, one at the Silverton Hotel, another at Widow Parker's boarding house, a third at the Cattleman's Rest, and the fourth, notably, in a room above McGregor's saloon with a direct line of sight to the bank's main entrance. Benjamin Howard, manning the telegraph office, intercepted a curious message. Though addressed to William Thorne in care of the Silverton Hotel, it had been sent in a simple substitution cipher that Howard, a veteran of Union Army communications during the war, recognized immediately. Shipment confirmed for Friday. Full D. And compliment expected, Howard relayed to Fletcher when the watchmaker stopped by to adjust the office clock. Strange way to discuss cattle business, isn't it? Fletcher's fingers never paused in their delicate adjustment of the clock's mechanism, but his eyes took on a harder cast. Indeed, particularly since Reed's herd arrived on Wednesday. He closed the clock face with a decisive click. "Tell me, Mr. Howard, have you noticed an increase in messages to surrounding towns these past few days?" Howard's eyebrows rose. "Now that you mention it, at least a dozen to Cooperville, Willis Creek, and Broken Spoke since Tuesday. Not unusual during shipping season, except they're all asking about law enforcement presence, marshal rotations, deputy counts, response times to outlying areas, ordinary questions made peculiar by their frequency." Fletcher nodded, seemingly satisfied with both the clock's function and Howard's observation. Peculiar indeed, almost as if someone were ensuring that neighboring towns would be preoccupied should Redemption Creek require assistance. That afternoon brought another piece to the emerging puzzle. Caleb Winston, who operated the livery stable, reported a suspicious transaction. 6 men came by first thing this morning, he told Fletcher, while the watchmaker repaired the intricate locking mechanism on his strongbox. "Paid premium for my finest horses, but insisted on keeping them stabled here until Friday. Said they had business in town and would return." Winston lowered his voice. "Paid in double eagles, Mr. Fletcher. Brand new, every one of them, like they'd come straight from a mint or a bank vault." Fletcher's hands remained steady on the delicate pins of the lock, but his mind was assembling these fragments into a clearer picture. 6 riders waiting for Friday. 4 well-dressed men taking strategic positions around town. A cattle drive serving as cover, its genuine cowboys potentially supplemented by imposters. All coinciding with the month-end transfer of cattle sale proceeds to the Territorial Bank in Denver. A shipment that would swell the Cattlemen's Trust's vault to its yearly maximum. "Tell me, Mr. Winston," Fletcher asked casually, "these men who reserved your horses, did one of them have a peculiar scar along his jawline, like a poorly healed knife wound?" Winston's eyes widened. As a matter of fact, yes. Mean-looking fellow, kept his hat pulled low, but I caught sight of it when he examined the mare's teeth. Ran from ear to chin on the left side. He studied Fletcher with newfound curiosity. How could you possibly know that? Fletcher snapped the strongbox shut, its mechanism now functioning with perfect precision. Just a detail from an old wanted poster that stuck in my mind. Nothing to concern yourself with. He handed the box back to Winston. Though you might consider taking your family to visit your sister in Colorado Springs, I hear the weather's particularly fine there this time of year. By Thursday afternoon, Fletcher's casual observations had coalesced into certainty. Isaiah. Blackburn and his brothers, James, Ezekiel, and the youngest cold-eyed Matthew, had arrived in Redemption Creek. They hadn't come alone. At least 15 experienced gunmen had filtered into town over the past 3 days, establishing a presence so gradually that most residents hadn't noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. What distinguished the Blackburns from common bandits was their systematic approach to violence. Isaiah, the eldest, had fought with Quantrill's raiders during the war, absorbing lessons in terror and tactical brutality that he'd refined in the decade since. James had served briefly as a lawman in Kansas before turning his badge and knowledge against the very institutions he'd once protected. Ezekiel, with his seminary education, brought an unsettling air of philosophical justification to their depredations. And Matthew, barely 22, possessed a natural talent for marksmanship that approached Fletcher's own legendary skill, coupled with a complete absence of restraint or mercy. Their methodology had evolved beyond simple robbery. The Blackburns didn't just take, they broke. Each town they targeted suffered not just financial loss, but a deeper wound to its sense of security and order. They left behind communities that never quite recovered, where citizens looked at neighbors with newfound suspicion, where the bonds of trust essential to frontier survival had been severed as cleanly as if by a surgeon's scalpel. In his small back room, Fletcher removed a floorboard beneath his narrow bed, revealing a space that contained none of the treasures or contraband one might expect in such a hiding place. Instead, it held a battered, leather-bound journal and a wooden case polished by years of handling. The journal he set aside, its contents catalogued years of hunts and the men who had fallen to his rifle. But the case he opened with a reverence that bordered on ritual. Nestled in green baize cloth lay a disassembled Sharps model 1874 rifle, the weapon that had earned him his reputation and the moniker that still echoed in campfire tales. Unlike the ornate presentation pieces favored by exhibition shooters, this was a working tool honed to lethal perfection. The octagonal barrel gleamed with the soft luster that comes only from years of meticulous care. The walnut stock, darkened by sweat and handling, bore notches too numerous to count at casual glance. The brass fittings, though unadorned, fitted together with a precision that matched the finest watch mechanisms. Fletcher assembled the rifle with practiced economy of motion, each component finding its place without hesitation or error. The familiarity of this ritual calmed him, focusing his mind on the task ahead. He worked a small amount of oil into the action, testing the trigger's pull with a sensitivity that could detect a discrepancy of fractions of an ounce. Satisfied, he loaded a single cartridge, then disassembled the weapon once more, returning it to its case with the same care with which he had built it. Friday, then, he murmured to the empty room. The pieces were set. The Blackburns had chosen. Their ground with characteristic thoroughness. But they had made one catastrophic miscalculation. They believed they were hunting in familiar territory against predictable opposition. They didn't realize they had wandered into the sights of a predator far more patient and precise than they could imagine. As darkness fell, Fletcher made his final preparations of the day. He wound each of the watches in his shop, ensuring they were synchronized to the second. Then he penned a brief note to Sheriff Montgomery, sealed it in an envelope, and addressed it with instructions that it be delivered only if Fletcher failed to open his shop at the customary hour the following morning. Across town, in the private dining room of the Silverton Hotel, Isaiah Blackburn presided over a very different kind of preparation. Spread before him on the table was a detailed map of Redemption Creek, annotated with timing observations, guard rotations, and escape routes. William Thorne, whose real name was Oliver Price, a former Pinkerton detective turned outlaw, provided his final reconnaissance report. The bank's vault will hold approximately $60,000 in cash and negotiable instruments tomorrow, based on the teller's ledger I glimpsed during my last visit, Price stated, his voice professionally detached. Security remains minimal, Sheriff. Montgomery, Deputy Collins, and occasionally Deputy Higgins, though the latter's nursing a broken arm from a bar fight last week. Isaiah nodded, his scarred face impassive. And the town itself, any complications? Price hesitated, an uncharacteristic breach in his usual confidence. One item of potential concern, he admitted finally. The watchmaker across from the bank. There's something unusual about him. Unusual how? James Blackburn demanded, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. Nothing I can precisely name, Price confessed. He asks no questions, causes no trouble, keeps to himself for the most part, but his eyes, he trailed off, searching for the right words. They see too much. And there's a way he moves. Economical, like a man who's spent years ensuring no motion is wasted. When I saw him adjust, his spectacles yesterday, his hand moved like a gunfighter's draw, pure muscle memory. Isaiah considered this information, absently tracing the scar on his jaw, a souvenir from a Texas ranger who'd come closer than most to ending the Blackburn saga years earlier. A former lawman, perhaps? Retired gun hand? Possibly, Price acknowledged. Though the town treats him with respect rather than fear, he's been here 4 years, established a reputation for honesty and craftsmanship. A man with a past isn't unusual in these parts, Isaiah decided after a moment. But we'll take no chances. Matthew, you'll handle this watchmaker first thing tomorrow. A tragic accident, a robbery gone wrong perhaps. Something to distract the sheriff while we attend to the bank. Matthew Blackburn smiled, a cold expression that never reached his pale blue eyes. Consider it done, brother. I've been wanting to try my hand at horology. Unbeknownst to the Blackburns, their supposedly secure conversation carried beyond the dining room's closed doors. Maria Vasquez, assigned to serve the private party, had positioned herself near the door under pretense of awaiting the kitchen's signal. As daughter of a man who had fled the political upheavals of Mexico with nothing but his family and his wits, she had learned early the value of information and the power of being underestimated. The moment she could slip away, she made her way, not to the sheriff's office, too obvious a move that would be watched by the Blackburns' lookouts, but to Fletcher's shop. Though closed for the evening, a light burned in the back room where the watchmaker typically worked on his more delicate repairs. She knocked at the rear entrance, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. A pattern Fletcher had casually suggested might be useful if you ever need to find me after hours. When he opened the door, the usual mild expression he presented to the world was gone, replaced by an alertness that might have frightened her had she not been raised by men of similar capability. They plan to kill you tomorrow morning, she said without preamble, her English precise despite the tension evident in her voice. A distraction while they rob the bank. The youngest brother, Matthew, he's been assigned to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Fletcher nodded, unsurprised. You've done well, Maria. Very well indeed. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brass key. "This opens a storeroom behind your father's restaurant. Inside, you'll find supplies and directions to a line shack in the high country. Take your family there first thing tomorrow and remain until someone comes for you with the password, Valentine." Her eyes widened at the implication that Fletcher had prepared escape routes and safe houses long in advance of the current danger. But what about the town, the people? A smile touched Fletcher's lips, though it held little humor. "Redemption Creek will survive, I promise you. The Blackburns have made a serious miscalculation in their planning." He ushered her toward the door. "Now go, quickly. Stay off the main street and tell no one what you've learned or where you're going." After Maria's departure, Fletcher returned to his workbench. He opened a drawer that contained dozens of small brass gears, springs, and watch components, all meticulously organized. Beneath this tray, however, lay a different sort of precision instrument, a custom-tooled Colt revolver with pearl grips and intricate scrollwork along the barrel. Unlike the plain, serviceable weapons carried by most frontier lawmen, this was a presentation piece, given to him by a grateful town council after he'd ended a particularly vicious gang's reign of terror in northern Texas. Fletcher checked the weapons action, loaded 5 chambers, leaving the hammer to rest on the empty 6th as was his custom, and placed it in a shoulder holster concealed beneath his vest. Then he extinguished his lamp and made his way through the darkened shop to the front window, where he could observe the Silverton Hotel across the street. One by one, lights winked out in the hotel's windows as the evening progressed. The Blackburns, having finalized their plans, would be resting now, conserving energy for tomorrow's violence. They anticipated an ordinary day in a typical frontier town, proceeding in predictable patterns until disrupted by their carefully orchestrated terror. What they couldn't know was that Redemption Creek had been subtly preparing for their arrival for years. Every modification Fletcher had suggested to the town council, every casual recommendation about building placement or street improvement, had been designed with this inevitable confrontation in mind. The Blackburns saw themselves as wolves entering a sheep pen. They didn't realize they had wandered into a killing ground designed by a hunter who had studied their kind with scientific precision. As midnight approached, Fletcher made one final round of his shop, checking sightlines from each window, verifying that the small bell he'd installed on the rear door was properly tensioned to sound at the slightest movement. Satisfied with these precautions, he settled into the rocking chair behind his counter, not to sleep, but to wait with the otherworldly patience that had allowed him to track men across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. The Blackburns believed they had orchestrated the perfect robbery, but Fletcher had been composing a different symphony of violence, one in which their predictable brutality would play directly into his hands. By sundown tomorrow, Redemption Creek would join the Valentine's Day reckoning in the annals of frontier justice, and the legend of 3 Fingers, Fletcher would gain a final, bloody chapter. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek with the crisp clarity unique to high country autumn. The first golden light illuminated empty streets, peaceful and ordinary, a deceptive calm that masked the currents of violence swirling beneath the town's surface. In his room above McGregor's saloon, Matthew Blackburn loaded his Remington revolver with the deliberate precision that had made him the most feared of the brothers despite his youth. Across town, his siblings and their assembled gunmen made similar preparations, checking weapons, confirming positions, rehearsing the timing that would transform a quiet town into chaos within minutes. Fletcher's shop remained dark, its curtains drawn, an apparent indication that the watchmaker had not yet arrived for his day's work. This deviation from his normally punctual routine drew the attention of Matthew Blackburn, who observed the shop from his vantage point with growing suspicion. The empty street offered a clear field of fire, but the watchmaker's absence from his predictable pattern introduced an unwelcome variable to the precisely timed operation. Unknown to Matthew or his brothers, Fletcher had spent the pre-dawn hours moving through town, awakening certain residents with specific instructions delivered in hushed tones. Sarah Donnelly closed her cafe with a hastily scrawled sign citing a family emergency. Theodore Harrington, the bank president, found himself escorted to the sheriff's office by Deputy Collins under pretense of reviewing security arrangements for the cash shipment. Key families with young children discovered urgent invitations to visit the new schoolhouse on the town's outskirts, where the teacher had prepared a special presentation on astronomy. By 7 o'clock, Redemption Creek had undergone a subtle transformation. The citizens who remained visible on the streets were predominantly men with military bearing who had arrived in town over recent months. Former soldiers, scouts, and lawmen who had found welcome in a community that asked few questions about their past. They moved with apparent casualness, but each positioned himself according to a plan long established through Fletcher's chess games and theoretical discussions of historical battles. At precisely 7:30, Fletcher emerged from the rear of his shop. Instead of opening the front door, as was his custom, he made his way along the narrow alley between buildings, moving with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to stalking both four-legged and two-legged prey. He carried a small leather satchel, its contents clinking faintly with the distinct sound of metal against metal. Sheriff Montgomery, watching from his office window, recognized the moment for what it was. The opening move in a game whose rules and stakes had been established long before the Blackburns selected Redemption Creek as their target. He checked his pocket watch against the large clock on the wall, confirming that both matched to the second. Then he lifted the speaking tube that connected his office to the telegraph room below. "Benjamin," he said quietly, "send the message." Across town, the pieces began to move into their final positions as the hour of reckoning approached. The message Benjamin Howard transmitted that morning wasn't sent to neighboring towns requesting assistance. Those channels had been compromised days ago by the Blackburns' network of paid informants. Instead, the seemingly innocuous weather report was directed to a single recipient, a cattle ranch 20 miles outside town where retired Marshal Ezekiel Stone had been waiting 3 days for precisely this signal. Stone was not a man given to reminiscence or sentimentality, but as he saddled his horse in the pre-dawn light, memories surfaced unbidden. 7 years earlier, he had led the federal task force assigned to investigate the Valentine's Day reckoning. What they found in that narrow mountain pass had changed his understanding of frontier justice forever. 27 cartridge cases, he muttered to himself, securing his rifle in its scabbard. 19 bodies, not one wasted shot. The bodies had been arranged with unsettling precision, a straight line running the length of the pass, each man positioned exactly 7 paces from the next. Most had fallen to single shots centered on vital areas, though 3 showed evidence of multiple wounds. More disturbing than the clinical efficiency of the kills was the evidence Stone's trackers had uncovered in the surrounding terrain. A single sniper's nest positioned on a ridge 350 yards from the ambush site, with clear firing lanes to every point in the pass. "One man," Stone had written in his official report. "One position, complete tactical control of the battlefield." But it was what they found in the sniper's nest that had truly distinguished Fletcher's work from ordinary manhunting. The ground around the position had been meticulously prepared, measurements scratched into rocks, marking exact distances to various points in the pass below. A series of small mirrors positioned to catch and redirect sunlight, eliminating shadows that might warn his targets. Most remarkably, a journal containing detailed observations of each outlaw's habits, tendencies, and predictable responses under pressure, compiled over months of patient study. Fletcher hadn't just killed 19. And that day, he had choreographed their deaths with the precision of a composer, predicting and exploiting their every movement until his design reached its inevitable conclusion. Now, 7 years later, Stone found himself riding toward Redemption Creek at the request of a ghost. The wire he'd received 3 weeks earlier had been signed simply JF, initials he'd never expected to see again. Its message was equally terse. Blackburns, Redemption Creek, arrive 23rd, wait for signal. No elaboration needed between men who had hunted the same breed of predator across the unforgiving landscape of the frontier. As the sun climbed higher, the pieces Fletcher had carefully positioned throughout Redemption Creek began to move according to his design. In the sheriff's office, Montgomery retrieved a wooden crate that had been stored beneath floorboards in his private quarters for nearly 2 years. Fletcher left this with me when he first suspected the Blackburns might eventually target our bank, he explained to Theodore Harrington as he pried open the lid. Said I'd know when the time came to use it. Inside lay 6 identical Colt revolvers, their blued steel barrels gleaming in the morning light. Beneath them, boxes of ammunition, specifically measured and packed to ensure consistent performance. Each gun had been meticulously modified, trigger pulls lightened, sights carefully filed for accuracy, chambers honed to match the exact dimensions of the custom-loaded cartridges. My God, Harrington whispered, lifting one of the weapons. Though no gunfighter, as a banker, he recognized craftsmanship and precision. These must have cost a small fortune. Fletcher said they were payment for a job years back, Montgomery replied, checking the action on one of the revolvers. From a town so grateful they'd have given him the keys to their treasury if he'd asked. He began loading the weapon with practiced efficiency. The real value isn't in the guns, though. It's in knowing exactly when and where to place them. Across town, Thomas Jefferson Hawkins unlocked a hidden compartment in his blacksmith shop, revealing not the tools of his current trade, but specialized equipment from his former life as a scout during the Apache Wars. Sharp hunting knives, rawhide cord perfect for improvised restraints, and most significantly, a collection of small metal devices resembling common horseshoe nails. Fletcher had me make these last year, he explained to the 4 men gathered in his shop, all former soldiers who had found their way to Redemption Creek through Fletcher's carefully cultivated network of contacts. Called 'em road stars. Scatter 'em where you want to discourage fast riding or running, he demonstrated by dropping one onto the packed earth floor, where it landed with one sharp point always facing upward, regardless of how it fell. Ingenious, commented a grey-bearded man who had introduced himself only as Wilson. His accent marked him as a former Confederate officer, though no one in Redemption Creek had ever asked about his past. Where do we deploy them? Hawkins unrolled a detailed map of the town on which Fletcher had marked specific areas in red ink. Every potential escape route except these 2, he indicated narrow alleys on the east side of town. Fletcher wants to control where they can run, not if they can run. In the basement of the Cattleman's Trust Bank, an even more remarkable scene unfolded. Behind the massive vault with its impressive Chicago lock mechanism, bank president Theodore Harrington revealed a secondary chamber whose existence was known to only 3 people in town. Fletcher designed it when we expanded last year, he told Deputy Collins as they transferred stacks of currency from the main vault. Said every fortress needs a decoy, something valuable enough to satisfy thieves but not so valuable its loss would cripple us. They worked quickly, replacing the bulk of the bank's holdings with bundles of cut paper weighted with a few real banknotes on top and bottom. The genuine currency, nearly $60,000, was secured in the hidden vault behind a false wall that would withstand anything short of dynamite. But how did he know? Collins wondered aloud. The Blackburns have hit a dozen banks, and they've never been fooled by false vaults or dummy safes. Harrington smiled grimly. Fletcher said it wasn't about fooling them. It was about making them Predictable. Said men like the Blackburns are more dangerous when they're improvising than when they're following a plan they believe is working. He secured the false wall. It seems invisible even under close inspection. He doesn't want to stop them robbing the bank. He wants them to rob it exactly as they've planned. Meanwhile, Fletcher himself had made his way to the town's waterworks, where the newly installed pump system provided pressure to hydrants along Main Street, an innovation he had enthusiastically supported with both technical suggestions and financial contributions. Benjamin Howard's younger brother William, who maintained the system, was waiting as instructed. "You understand what needs to be done?" Fletcher asked, removing specialized tools from his satchel. William nodded, though his expression showed concern. "Cut pressure to all hydrants, except those on the east side when I see the bank doors open. But Mr. Fletcher, without water, if they start shooting and hit an oil lamp—" "They won't," Fletcher interrupted with quiet certainty. "Isaiah Blackburn doesn't burn what he can't first loot. Fire isn't part of their method." He knelt beside a large valve wheel, making minute adjustments to its tension. "What we're doing is controlling their options. Men like the Blackburns always keep one eye on their escape. By limiting where they can get water if needed, we're subtly channeling them without their knowledge." Fletcher worked silently for several minutes, calibrating the system to his precise requirements. When he finished, he handed William a brass watch from his vest pocket. "Synchronize with this. Timing will be critical today." As William adjusted, his own timepiece, curiosity finally overcame his restraint. "Sir, may I ask, how did you know they were coming? The Blackburns, I mean. They've never hit the same territory twice, and you've been preparing for them since before I started working." "Here 2 years ago." Fletcher's weathered face showed a flicker of what might have been satisfaction. "Because I understand men like Isaiah Blackburn, the way a watchmaker understands gears and springs. Their patterns are just as precise, just as predictable. Once. You've studied them long enough." He secured his tools in the satchel. 7 years ago in the Diablo Mountains, I ended the career of Jack Parsons and his gang, men cut from the same cloth as the Blackburns. That was a tactical victory, but a strategic failure." "Failure?" William echoed, confused. "The Valentines. Day Reckoning was legendary, a textbook example of how one determined lawman could triumph against overwhelming odds. I eliminated 19 men, but left a vacuum that stronger, smarter predators quickly filled," Fletcher explained. "Nature abhors such spaces. I knew someone like the Blackburns would eventually rise to prominence using the same methods, but refined, improved. So I chose this town, with its strategic location, its economic significance, its physical layout conducive to defense, and began preparing for the inevitable day they would target it." He checked his watch again. "And now, right on schedule, they've arrived." Across town, in the storeroom of the Copper Kettle restaurant, Maria Vasquez and her family made final preparations for their departure to the line shack Fletcher had designated. Her father, Eduardo, inspected the supplies Fletcher had stockpiled, enough food and water for a week, medical supplies, ammunition for the Winchester rifle included among the provisions. "This man, this watchmaker," Eduardo said softly in Spanish. "He is more than he appears." Maria nodded, recalling the transformation she'd witnessed the previous night when she'd delivered her warning. The quiet, methodical craftsman had briefly shown another face, that of a predator assessing threats with cold calculation. "He told me once that his mother's people were Comanche," she replied. "Said they taught him that patience is a weapon sharper than any blade or bullet." Eduardo considered this, then reached beneath his coat and withdrew a silver medal on a chain. "San Miguel Archangel, patron saint of protection." "For him," he said, pressing it into his daughter's hand. "A man who fights devils should carry the saint who cast Satan from heaven." As Maria tucked the medal into her pocket, a flicker of movement through the storeroom's small window caught her attention. Down the alley behind the restaurant, a tall figure in a black duster moved with distinctive purpose toward the rear of Fletcher's shop. Even from this distance, the glint of sun on his pale blonde hair was unmistakable. Matthew Blackburn, arriving earlier than the schedule she had overheard. "They've changed their plan," she whispered urgently. "The youngest brother. He's going. After Fletcher now." Without hesitation, Maria slipped out the back door despite her father's protests. She moved swiftly through back alleys toward Fletcher's shop, clutching the saint's medal like a talisman. The warning she carried might make no difference. Fletcher himself had instructed her family to leave town immediately, but something deeper than gratitude drove her forward. In a land where justice often came from the barrel of a gun, rather than a courtroom, Fletcher represented something rare, protection for those society typically overlooked. Mexican families like hers, Chinese laundrymen, freedmen seeking opportunity in the West, all had found in Redemption Creek a community where their worth was measured by character rather than origin. And that, she suddenly understood, was Fletcher's true legacy. Beyond his legend as a manhunter, beyond the almost supernatural stories of his marksmanship, he had built something lasting in this high mountain town, a redemption worthy of its name. The day that would transform Redemption Creek's history continued to unfold according to designs laid years in advance. At the livery stable, the 6 premium horses ostensibly reserved by the Blackburns men received special attention from Caleb Winston. While maintaining a casual demeanor, he worked specialized compounds into their feed. Nothing harmful, but carefully formulated to reduce their stamina at a critical moment. "Fletcher had me prepare this months ago," he explained to his son as they worked. "Said it might never be needed, but better to have and not need than need and not have." The mixture, derived from Fletcher's knowledge of native remedies, would take effect gradually, ensuring that any escape attempt on horseback would falter before reaching the mountain passes. In his hotel room, Isaiah Blackburn made final adjustments to the plan in response to reports from his scouts. The unexpected absence of certain townspeople, particularly families with children, from their normal routines suggested a potential security leak. The bank president's presence at the sheriff's office, rather than his customary morning inspection of the vault, hinted at defensive preparations. "They know something's coming," James observed, checking the loading of his Remington. Question is, how much do they know? Isaiah's scarred face remained impassive as he studied the town map. "Doesn't matter. They can't stop what they can't see coming. We've got men positioned in every critical location, and our diversion will scatter whatever meager defense they've mustered." He traced a finger along their primary escape route. "The cash will be in the vault as always. Once we have it, we ride east through Sawyer's Pass. Even if they manage to organize a pursuit, the terrain favors us." "And the watchmaker?" Ezekiel inquired. "Has Matthew reported in?" "Not yet," Isaiah acknowledged, "but it's a simple task. The man repairs clocks for a living, for God's sake. He's likely dead already." At that exact moment, Matthew Blackburn was indeed approaching Fletcher's shop, though not with the swagger typical of his usual operations. Something about this assignment had triggered an uncharacteristic caution in the youngest Blackburn. Perhaps it was Price's unease regarding the watchmaker, or perhaps it was some primitive instinct for self-preservation asserting itself at the critical moment. He circled the building once, noting the absence of light or movement inside. The rear door stood slightly ajar, an invitation so obvious it immediately raised his suspicion. Drawing his revolver, Matthew approached from an oblique angle that provided maximum cover, using reflections in the shop's side window to check for movement within. The interior appeared empty, Fletcher's workbench tidied with the precision characteristic of his reputation. Tools hung in perfect alignment on the wall above, each secured to a specific outline painted on the wood. The regulator clock that governed Fletcher's work ticked steadily, its pendulum swinging with hypnotic regularity in the otherwise silent room. Matthew edged closer to the door, every sense alert for the trap he increasingly suspected awaited him. The floorboard beneath his right boot creaked slightly, a sound that would have been imperceptible to most, but to a man balanced on the knife edge of violent action, it echoed like a gunshot. He froze, waiting for some response from within. None came. After 30 seconds of tense silence, he eased forward again, pushing the door fully open with the barrel of his revolver. The hinges moved without sound. Recently oiled, he noted with growing unease. The shop's interior remained. Still, except for the pendulum's metronomic swing and the soft ticking of dozens of timepieces. Matthew stepped inside, keeping his back to the wall as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer light. A workbench, a counter for receiving customers, shelves of clocks and watches in various states of repair, all normal for such an establishment. Yet, something felt wrong. The space seemed arranged not just with the fastidiousness of a craftsman, but with the calculated precision of a tactician. From his position, Matthew could see through to the front of the shop, where light filtered through partially drawn curtains. The street beyond appeared quiet, too quiet for mid-morning in a busy cattle town. This observation solidified his growing certainty that something larger was unfolding, something that transformed his simple assignment into a potentially lethal complication. A soft sound from above, barely more than a settling of weight on old floorboards, drew Matthew's attention to the ceiling. The shop occupied only the ground floor of the building. Above was a storage loft accessed by a ladder. In the rear corner, as Matthew's eyes found the ladder, he noticed a detail that sent a chill through his practiced composure. A thin wire running from the top rung to a small brass bell positioned among the tools on Fletcher's workbench. A warning system. Simple, mechanical, effective, precisely what one would expect from a watchmaker, but why would a simple craftsman need such an alert? Matthew began backing toward the door, his instincts screaming for immediate withdrawal, when a voice like dry autumn leaves rustling across stone spoke from the shadows to his right. "You're earlier than I expected, Mr. Blackburn. Your brothers must be getting impatient in their old age." Matthew Blackburn's revolver swung toward the voice with practiced speed, but Fletcher had already disappeared from the spot where he'd stood a heartbeat earlier. The youngest Blackburn found himself firing at shadows, the report of his weapon deafening in the confined space of the shop. The bullet shattered the glass face of a long-case clock, sending fragments tinkling to the floor like crystalline rain. "You've just destroyed a timepiece that survived the Battle of Waterloo." Fletcher's voice came from a different corner now. "It kept perfect time for 70 years until you walked through my door." Matthew pivoted again, but held his fire, suddenly aware that shooting blindly played into his adversary's hands. The maze of shelves, cabinets, and hanging tools transformed the simple shop into a combat environment where knowledge of the terrain granted decisive advantage. "Show yourself, old man," Matthew demanded, attempting to project confidence he no longer felt. "I don't have time for games." A soft chuckle echoed from somewhere to his left. An unfortunate choice of words in a watchmaker's shop. The sound of a match being struck drew Matthew's attention upward, where Fletcher now stood on the narrow gallery that ran along the wall, calmly lighting a lamp. The increased illumination revealed the watchmaker fully for the first time, not in his customary shopkeeper's attire, but dressed in dust-colored buckskins that would blend perfectly with the high country terrain. A cartridge belt crossed his chest, and the revolver in his hand, though not aimed directly at Matthew, would require only a flick of the wrist to deliver a killing shot. "Your brothers will be wondering what's taking so long," Fletcher observed. Conversationally, Isaiah in particular hates deviation from a schedule, makes him impulsive. The casual mention of Isaiah by name sent a jolt through Matthew. The Blackburns operated under strict anonymity in their target communities, using false identities established weeks in advance. For this watchmaker to speak so familiarly of them confirmed his worst suspicions. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. A gun still tracking Fletcher's every movement. "Just a repairman," Fletcher replied with disarming simplicity. "I fix broken things, watches, communities, injustices." He descended the gallery stairs with unhurried precision. Sometimes that requires dismantling mechanisms that can't be salvaged. Matthew tensed as Fletcher reached the floor, but the older man made no aggressive movement. Instead, he gestured toward the workbench, where a half-assembled pocket watch lay surrounded by tiny components. "Do you know what makes a fine timepiece valuable, Mr. Blackburn? It's not the gold case or jeweled bearings. It's the predictability, the absolute certainty that when the second hand reaches a specific point, a specific action will follow." He smiled thinly. "Men like your brothers operate on similar principles. Once set in motion, their patterns become as predictable as my regulator clock." Outside, the town bell struck 9, its clear tone carrying across Redemption Creek. Fletcher's smile deepened. "Right on schedule. Your brothers should be moving into position now, unaware that their carefully planned operation was designed by someone else entirely." Across town, this prediction manifested with unsettling accuracy. Isaiah Blackburn gave the signal that activated his network of gunmen. The operation began with a coordinated series of diversions. A wagon overturned on the south end of town, blocking potential reinforcements from that direction. Smoke bombs detonated near the livery stable, creating confusion that would scatter and divide defenders, and most significantly a drunken confrontation between two of his men outside the sheriff's office, designed to draw Montgomery and his deputies into a petty dispute, while the main assault targeted the bank. These tactics had served the Blackburns flawlessly in previous robberies, creating sufficient chaos to divide Lawman's attention without triggering the full defensive response a more direct approach might provoke. What Isaiah couldn't know was that each diversion point had been anticipated years earlier by Fletcher, who had positioned his own assets accordingly. The overturned wagon found itself immediately surrounded by 4 of Hawkins' former soldiers, who secured the Blackburn men with practiced efficiency before they could escalate to the next phase of their plan. The smoke bombs at the livery stable, rather than creating random panic, were contained by Winston and his stable hands, who had been rehearsing precisely this scenario during monthly fire drills instituted at Fletcher's suggestion. Most dramatically, the staged confrontation outside the sheriff's office encountered a reception far different from the distracted response the Blackburns had expected. Instead of rushing to intervene, Montgomery and his deputies watched calmly from behind reinforced windows as the drunk agitators found themselves outflanked by townsmen who emerged from seemingly random positions with weapons drawn. Inside the Silverton Hotel, Isaiah Blackburn watched these developments with growing unease. The coordinated defense shown by the townspeople wasn't the haphazard response of a surprised community. It displayed the hallmarks of a counter-ambush executed with military precision. "Something's wrong," he muttered, eyes narrowing as he studied the street below. "Matthew should have neutralized the watchmaker by now, and these people, they're moving like they've rehearsed this." James Blackburn joined him at the window, his usual swagger tempered by professional concern. Price's intel was solid. This town has no significant law enforcement presence beyond Montgomery and his deputies. "Then who are these men?" Isaiah demanded, indicating the armed civilians who had systematically contained their diversionary teams. Before James could respond, the door to their room crashed open. Both brothers whirled, guns drawn, only to find Ezekiel Blackburn. His usual composure shattered, blood soaked his left sleeve where a bullet had grazed his upper arm. "It's a trap," he gasped, slamming the door behind him. "The whole damned town is a trap. Our men at the bank were ambushed the moment they drew weapons. Half are down, the rest scattered." He pressed a bandana against his wound, wincing. "And Matthew's missing. No sign of him since he left for the watchmaker's shop." Isaiah's mind raced, calculating options with the cold efficiency that had preserved the gang through countless operations. Their primary escape route was likely compromised if the town had prepared so thoroughly. The secondary would require reaching the stabled horses before authorities could block access to the eastern trails. "We revert to contingency plan yellow," he decided. 30 minutes to rendezvous at Sawyer's Pass. Anyone not there gets left behind. The Blackburns had never abandoned their own before, but survival now demanded adaptation. "James, round up. Who you can. Ezekiel, secure our horses. I'll create a diversion to split their forces." As his brothers moved to execute these orders, Isaiah withdrew a small package from his saddlebag, dynamite sticks bound together with a short fuse, a weapon of last resort he'd never before needed to deploy. The Blackburns preferred the surgical precision of well-placed bullets to wholesale destruction, but desperate circumstances required escalation. "They want to play games," he muttered, striking a match. "Let's see how they handle this." Back at Fletcher's shop, Matthew Blackburn found himself in an increasingly surreal confrontation. Rather than attempt to overpower or outshoot him, Fletcher had simply continued their conversation, circling the shop while maintaining a careful distance. Each movement seemed calculated to position Matthew with his back to different parts of the store, though the significance of this pattern remained elusive. "Your brothers are experiencing an uncomfortable revelation right about now," Fletcher remarked, glancing at his pocket watch. "The discovery that they're not the authors of today's events, merely actors in a play, written long before they arrived." "You talk too much for a dead man," Matthew snapped, his patience fraying. "Whatever game you're playing ends now." He raised his revolver with deadly intent, only to freeze at a new sound, a soft click behind him like the delicate mechanism of a watch engaging. "I wouldn't move suddenly if I were you," Fletcher advised calmly. "That sound you just heard was the final tumbler falling into place. This entire shop is a mechanism, you see. Every shelf, every counter, every floorboard positioned with specific purpose." He gestured toward Matthew's feet. "Including the pressure plate you're currently standing on." Matthew's eyes darted downward, though he knew better than to shift. His weight, the floorboard beneath his right boot, did indeed appear slightly different from those surrounding it, raised perhaps a quarter-inch above the others. "A bluff," he declared, though uncertainty had crept into his voice. "You're a watchmaker, not a demolitions expert." Fletcher's weathered face showed something almost like disappointment. "You Blackburns never did proper research on your targets, too convinced of your own superiority." He moved to his workbench and lifted a framed certificate that had hung behind it. "Before watches, I specialized in a different kind of precise mechanism, worked for the Army Corps of Engineers during the war, designing explosive ordnance with minimal collateral impact." The certificate, yellowed with age but clearly official, confirmed this claim in flowing script. Matthew felt the first flutter of genuine fear touch his spine. "The plate you're standing on isn't connected to explosives," Fletcher continued, replacing the frame. "That would be excessive and might damage my inventory. It's linked to something much simpler, a specialized restraint system I designed for the Arizona Territorial Prison in '69. He smiled thinly. "The warden wanted a way to immobilize prisoners during transport without constant supervision. I gave him something that would activate if they attempted escape." "You're lying," Matthew insisted, though his gun hand had developed an almost imperceptible tremor. "Am I?" Fletcher raised an eyebrow. "Care to test that theory with a sudden movement, or would you prefer to survive the day? Your brothers, despite their numerous flaws, might actually attempt to rescue you, which would make you far more valuable to me alive than dead." Outside, the sound of gunfire erupted from the direction of the hotel. sporadic at first, then intensifying into the unmistakable rhythm of a coordinated exchange. Matthew's expression flickered between rage and calculation as he recognized the signature cadence of his brother's weapons. "They'll kill everyone in this town to get me back," he warned, attempting to regain psychological advantage. Fletcher tilted his head, listening to the pattern of shots with the focused attention of a conductor analyzing an orchestra. "No, they won't," he replied with quiet certainty. "Isaiah has already shifted to extraction protocol. The explosives he's prepared will be directed at creating escape routes, not vengeance." He checked his pocket watch once more. In approximately 4 minutes, he'll attempt to breach the livery stable from the south entrance, having concluded correctly that it's the least defended approach. Matthew's eyes widened slightly at this precise prediction of his brother's tactics. "How could you possibly—" "Because I've spent years studying Isaiah Blackburn's methods," Fletcher interrupted. "Every robbery, every escape, every contingency plan your gang has employed. I know how he thinks, because men like him can only think in certain patterns." His voice hardened. "Just like I knew that when Jack Parsons and his butchers approached that pass in the Diablo 7 years ago, they'd ride single file to minimize their silhouette against the horizon. 19 men, 19 shots, 19 funerals." The implication landed like a physical blow. Matthew's composure cracked as recognition dawned. "3 fingers Fletcher," he whispered, the name emerging like a curse. "You're supposed to be dead." "A useful fiction," Fletcher acknowledged. "It allowed me to prepare properly for your arrival." At the livery stable, events unfolded with the precise timing Fletcher had predicted. Isaiah Blackburn, having gathered the remnants of his scattered forces, just 7 men from the original 20, approached the stable's southern wall, where a small delivery door offered access to the hay storage area. The main doors facing the street were visibly guarded, but this secondary entrance appeared unprotected amid the confusion engulfing the town. 2 minutes, Isaiah instructed, as one of his men prepared a small explosive charge against the wooden Duda. "We grab the horses and ride hard for Sawyer's Pass. No stopping for anything or anyone." The charge detonated with a sharp crack, blowing the door inward. Isaiah led the way, revolver ready, only to pull up short at the sight that greeted him. The interior was dimly lit as expected, but instead of rows of stalls containing their reserved mounts, he found an open space cleared of hay and obstructions. In its center stood Sheriff Montgomery, flanked by 6 deputies, all holding the distinctive modified Colt revolvers Fletcher had provided. "Morning, Blackburn," Montgomery greeted him with remarkable calm. "We've been expecting you." Isaiah's tactical mind processed the ambush in a fraction of a second. The positioning of Montgomery's men, the absence of the horses, the fact that this supposedly unguarded entrance had been prepared and waiting for him, all pointed to a level of counterplanning that transcended coincidence. "Fletcher," he growled, the name emerging as both question and realization. Montgomery's eyebrows rose slightly. "Now how would a stranger passing through know our watchmaker by name?" he asked conversationally, though his gun never wavered. "Unless perhaps that stranger had particular reason to research our little town before visiting." Isaiah's response was characteristic of the man who had carved a bloody legend across 4 territories. Swift, decisive violence. He fired twice at Montgomery while diving sideways toward a support post, simultaneously barking orders to his men. "Fall back! Secondary extraction!" The sheriff, however, had anticipated this reaction. His first shot caught Isaiah in the right shoulder, spinning him halfway around before he could reach cover. The Blackburn gang's return fire was met with disciplined volleys from Montgomery's deputies, the specialized ammunition in their modified Colts, delivering devastating accuracy even in the stable's challenging light conditions. Within 30 seconds, The outcome was decided. 4 of Isaiah's men lay dead or wounded on the hay-strewn floor. The others, including Isaiah himself, found themselves pinned down with rapidly diminishing options. "You can't have known," Isaiah called out during a lull in the firing, genuine bewilderment coloring his voice. "We never hit the same territory. Twice. Never established patterns. How could Fletcher have prepared for us specifically?" "He didn't prepare for you specifically," Montgomery replied. "He prepared for men like you in general, said the frontier breeds your kind like rotting meat." "Breeds flies," the sheriff's voice hardened. "He also said you'd try this exact approach if your primary plan failed. Something about your psychological profile making you predictable under pressure." Across town, Ezekiel Blackburn was discovering similar disruptions to their escape plans. The horses they had reserved, supposedly the finest mounts in Winston's stable, performed erratically when pressed into service. 2 developed sudden lameness, while the others demonstrated a peculiar reluctance to maintain speed, fighting their riders' urging toward the mountain trails. "Something's wrong with these animals," Ezekiel called to James as they struggled to make headway along the eastern route. "They've been tampered with." James Blackburn, blood streaming from a graze along his temple where a shopkeeper's bullet had come closer than comfort allowed, cast a desperate glance back toward the town. Smoke now rose from multiple locations as the carefully orchestrated robbery degenerated into chaotic violence. The Blackburns had never encountered such comprehensive resistance, had never seen their meticulously planned operation collapse so completely. "We can't wait for Isaiah," he decided, the words tearing from him like physical pain. The bond between the brothers had been their one constant in a life of violence and betrayal. To abandon one was unthinkable, yet the alternative now meant capture or death for them all. "Head for the high country. We'll circle back when we've lost any pursuit." Ezekiel nodded grimly, understanding the calculus of survival that drove this decision. The Blackburns had built their legend on ruthless pragmatism. Sentiment was a luxury they had never afforded themselves. What neither brother could know was that their escape route, seemingly the only unguarded exit from Redemption Creek, had been deliberately left open according to Fletcher's design. The eastern trail led directly toward a narrow ridge where Marshal Ezekiel Stone had positioned himself 2 hours earlier, his specialized Whitworth rifle assembled and zeroed for the exact distance to the trail below. Stone watched through his scope as the 2 riders approached, their mounts labored progress confirming that Winston had successfully implemented Fletcher's sabotage of the stable's feed. Even at this distance, he could identify the Blackburns by their distinctive riding styles. James sitting tall in military fashion, Ezekiel hunched forward like the seminary student he had once been. "Range, 430 yards, Stone murmured to himself, adjusting his sights for elevation and the slight crosswind, moving targets, compromised mounts, uneven terrain. A challenge for most marksmen. But Stone hadn't been chosen for this position by accident. Fletcher had specifically requested him for the operation, knowing his skills with a long rifle were second only to Fletcher's own. Stone drew a deep breath, held it, then exhaled half, finding the stillness between heartbeats that distinguished elite shooters from common riflemen. His finger took up the first pressure on the trigger, waiting for the perfect moment when the Blackburns would reach the clearing Fletcher had identified years earlier as the ideal interdiction point. Meanwhile, in town, the situation at the bank had developed in unexpected ways. The Blackburns' remaining men, realizing their leaders had abandoned them, made a desperate attempt to salvage something from the failed operation. Led by Oliver Price, the man who had scouted Redemption Creek under the alias William Thorne, they fought their way into the bank's main room, only to find the vault standing open and apparently unguarded. "Check it," Price ordered one of his men, maintaining cover near the entrance. "If there's anything valuable, grab it and let's get out of here." The man rushed forward, eager to reach the perceived safety of the vault's interior. As he crossed the threshold, however, a metallic click echoed through the bank, another of Fletcher's carefully prepared mechanisms activating. Iron bars crashed down from recesses in the ceiling, sealing the vault entrance with a secondary barred gate that transformed the secure room into a perfect prison cell. "What the hell?" The trapped robber rattled the bars futilely. "Price, get me out of here," Price cursed, immediately recognizing another level of the trap that had ensnared them. "Forget him," he told his remaining men. "We need to—" His words died in his throat as the bank's rear door swung open to reveal Theodore Harrington, flanked by 4 armed clerks, each holding one of Fletcher's modified Colts. "Gentlemen," the bank president greeted them with remarkable composure, "I believe this concludes our business for the day." Back at Fletcher's shop, Matthew Blackburn had reached a critical decision point. The continued sounds of gunfire from town indicated that his brother's operation had degenerated into the kind of chaotic violence they typically avoided. The precision and control that characterized Blackburn robberies had been systematically dismantled by Fletcher's counter-strategy. "They're not coming for you," Fletcher observed, still watching Matthew with analytical detachment. "Isaiah will have already calculated your probable status and adjusted his plans accordingly. Family loyalty extends only so far when survival is at stake." Matthew's face twisted with the particular fury of a man confronting an uncomfortable truth. The Blackburns' bond, while genuine, had always been predicated on mutual benefit. Isaiah's tactical doctrine, drilled into his brothers from childhood, placed mission success above individual survival, even when that individual was family. "What happens now?" Matthew asked, gun still trained on Fletcher, though they both recognized the standoff had reached its practical conclusion. "Now." Fletcher glanced toward the window where dust rising from the eastern trail indicated riders moving away from town. "Now Marshal Stone intercepts your brothers, while Sheriff Montgomery secures what's left of your men in town. By sundown, the legend of the Blackburn gang joins all those other cautionary tales told around campfires." "And me?" Fletcher's expression showed the first hint of genuine emotion, not satisfaction or triumph, but a weariness that suggested the human cost of violence weighed on him despite his clinical approach to dispensing justice. "You have 2 options, Mr. Blackburn. Attempt something rash and join the statistical legacy of men who've died in this shop." He gestured toward a shelf where, Matthew now noticed, a row of pocket watches sat in silent testimony. Each bore a name and date etched on its case. "Or accept that today marks the end of your current career and the beginning of whatever follows." Matthew's eyes narrowed, studying the line of watches. "You keep trophies? That's unexpectedly grotesque for a man of your supposed principles." "Not trophies," Fletcher corrected him. "Memorials. Each watch runs at the exact moment its owner's time ended. I maintain them as reminders of the cost of the work I do." He removed his own timepiece, checking it against the regulator clock on the wall. "It appears your brother Isaiah is about to make a final stand at the livery stable. His preference for symbolic last gestures suggests he'll attempt to take Montgomery with him rather than surrender." The following morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of security to Redemption Creek. Citizens who had sheltered during the previous day's violence emerged to assess the aftermath, finding remarkably little physical damage given the scale of the confrontation. Fletcher's strategic emphasis on controlled engagement rather than destructive firefights had preserved both lives and property, another calculated element in his comprehensive approach. At the sheriff's office, Theodore Harrington supervised the return of funds to the bank vault, now that the need for the deception had passed. "Remarkable," he commented to Montgomery as they verified the accounting. "Not a single dollar lost, despite the most sophisticated robbery attempt in territorial history." Credit goes to Fletcher, the sheriff replied, watching as deputies fingerprinted the surviving Blackburn gang members for official records. He turned their precision against them, made their methodical approach into a weakness rather than a strength. Near the livery stable, Thomas Jefferson Hawkins oversaw the removal of specialized defensive measures Fletcher had installed throughout town. The road stars were carefully collected, the modified hitching posts returned to standard configuration, the concealed shooting positions dismantled with the same thoroughness that had characterized their creation. "Strange to think it's over," he remarked to Winston as they worked. 4 years of preparation for a single day's action. "Not so strange when you consider the stakes," the stableman replied, leading a horse whose feed was finally free of Fletcher's specialized compounds. The Blackburns would have kept hitting towns across the territory if someone hadn't stopped them. Better a long planning and a short fight than the other way around. At the eastern edge of town, Marshal Stone prepared for his departure. The surviving Blackburn brothers would be transported to Denver for trial once Matthew had provided his testimony against their financial backers, another piece of Fletcher's strategic design falling into place with clockwork precision. "You could stay," Montgomery suggested as they shared a final cup of coffee at the Blue Bonnet Cafe. "Town like this could use a man with your experience." Stone shook his head, gazing past the sheriff toward Fletcher's shop where the watchmaker had already opened for business, as if the previous day had been entirely unremarkable. "Some men are meant to build communities," he replied. "Others are designed for different work. Fletcher's found his balance between the two. I'm still searching for mine." Near noon, the expected stage arrived, carrying Justice Department Representative Lawrence Chambers, a spectacled, precisely dressed Easterner whose demeanor suggested more familiarity with courtrooms than frontier conflict. He made his way directly to Fletcher's shop, observed by curious townspeople who had come to appreciate the significance of visitors to the unassuming watchmaker. Inside, Fletcher received him without surprise, offering tea from a precisely arranged service that, like everything else in the shop, served multiple purposes. The fine china cups and silver service were not merely hospitality, but assessment tools, Chambers' handling of them revealing details about his character and background that would inform their negotiation. "The department is most impressed with your operation here," Chambers began, accepting the offered cup with the careful movements of a man accustomed to formality. "The methodology, the documentation, the strategic integration of civilian and law enforcement resources, quite revolutionary in approach." Fletcher inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the compliment without visible pride. "Necessity often breeds innovation." The Blackburns represented an evolution in criminal enterprise. Their defeat required corresponding evolution in response. "Precisely why we're interested in institutionalizing your approach." Chambers withdrew official documents from his satchel, spreading them across the counter with bureaucratic precision. "The position would involve developing training protocols, strategic assessment frameworks, community preparation guidelines, essentially codifying your methods for broader application." Fletcher studied the paperwork with the focused attention he brought to examining a complex watch mechanism. The terms were generous, the autonomy substantial, the potential impact significant. Yet something in his expression suggested reservation. "You have concerns," Chambers observed. "The methods I've developed," Fletcher replied carefully, "they're predicated on adaptation to specific circumstances. Standardization risks creating rigid protocols that intelligent adversaries will eventually circumvent." "A valid concern," the representative acknowledged, "which is why the department envisions this as a living methodology, continuously refined based on field results and emerging threats." He gestured toward Fletcher's journal. Your documentation of the Blackburn operation demonstrates remarkable analytical rigor. That same approach, applied to training and strategic development, could transform frontier law enforcement. Their discussion continued with the measured pace of men accustomed to deliberation rather than impulsivity. Outside, Redemption Creek began preparations for the evening celebration, a community acknowledgement of their shared victory over forces that would have exploited their vulnerabilities and destroyed their hard-won progress. By late afternoon, Fletcher had reached his decision. The agreement he signed represented not capitulation to bureaucratic standardization, but recognition that systematic approaches to community defense offered more sustainable protection than reliance on exceptional individuals. The frontier's transition from wild territory to settled civilization required corresponding evolution in how justice was conceived and delivered. As shadows lengthened across Main Street, Fletcher made his way to the jail where Matthew Blackburn awaited transfer to Denver. The youngest brother's decision had paralleled Fletcher's own, recognition that adaptation offered better prospects than rigid adherence to outdated methodologies. "I've spoken with Marshal Stone," Fletcher informed him, taking a seat opposite the cell. "Arrangements have been made for your testimony. Assuming you fulfill your obligations, the conditional pardon will be processed as discussed." Matthew studied him with the analytical intensity that had made him the tactical conscience of the Blackburn operation. "You planned for this outcome from the beginning, didn't you? Not just our defeat, but my specific cooperation." Fletcher neither confirmed nor denied this, his expression revealing nothing. "Let's say I recognized potential variables and prepared accordingly." "Variables," Matthew repeated with a sardonic edge. "Is that how you see people, as components in some grand mechanism you're assembling?" "Not components," Fletcher corrected him. "Complex systems with predictable tendencies under specific conditions. Understanding those tendencies allows for strategic influence without direct control." The distinction might have seemed academic to most, but Matthew's expression showed comprehension. His own approach to planning Blackburn operations had involved similar psychological assessment of targets and defenders, a methodology Fletcher had studied and countered with devastating effectiveness. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "To Redemption Creek, I mean. With the Blackburns eliminated, does it return to being just another cattle town with a peculiarly precise watchmaker?" Fletcher considered this question with genuine reflection. Communities, like individuals, are shaped by the challenges they overcome. Redemption Creek has developed strengths and capabilities it didn't possess before: cooperation, coordination, strategic awareness. He glanced toward the window, where preparations for the evening's celebration continued. Those qualities will serve it well against whatever threats emerge next. "And you?" Matthew's curiosity seemed sincere. Will the legendary Three Fingers Fletcher return to anonymity now that his greatest hunt has concluded? "Legends serve purposes," Fletcher replied, rising to depart. "Sometimes they're more effective when believed dead or retired." He paused at the cell door. "Remember that when you begin your new role, the man who helps dismantle the Blackburn's financial network will make powerful enemies. Enemies who might be less vigilant if they believe that man poses no personal threat." The insight, tactical guidance disguised as casual observation, registered in Matthew's expression. Another lesson in strategic thinking from the master who had orchestrated his brother's downfall and his own unlikely salvation. As night fell over Redemption Creek, the town's celebration commenced with music, food, and the particular exuberance of a community that has faced existential threat and emerged intact. Fletcher, characteristically, did not attend. His presence would have shifted focus from the collective achievement to individual heroism, a narrative he had spent decades attempting to correct. Instead, he remained in his shop, completing repairs on watches brought by townspeople who had participated in the defense. Each timepiece represented a contributor to the strategic victory. Montgomery's deputy with his specialized Colt, Benjamin Howard, who had maintained secure communications, young Tommy Donnelly, who had served as messenger between defensive positions. Fletcher adjusted each mechanism with the same care he had applied to tuning the town's collective defensive response. Sarah Donnelly arrived as he completed the final repair, carrying a covered dish from the celebration. "The town sends its thanks," she said, placing the offering on his counter, "though they'd prefer to deliver it in person." Fletcher nodded acknowledgement without looking up from his work. "Communities celebrate together. That's appropriate. And the man who saved the community remains a part. Is that appropriate too?" There was no judgment in her question, only genuine curiosity about a man who had integrated himself into their town while maintaining fundamental separation. "I didn't save Redemption Creek," Fletcher corrected her, finally looking up from the watch movement. "I merely provided tools and guidance. The community saved itself through cooperation and coordination." Sarah studied him with the perceptiveness that had allowed her to recognize his true nature long before others. "You really believe that, don't you? It's not false modesty or strategic misdirection. It's tactical reality," Fletcher replied. "One exceptional individual can defeat ordinary threats, but sophisticated predators require community response. What happened yesterday wasn't about my skills or planning. It was about Redemption Creek becoming something more than the sum of its individual citizens. This philosophy, community defense as evolutionary adaptation rather than dependence on extraordinary protectors, represented Fletcher's most significant legacy. Beyond the captured outlaws, beyond the tactical brilliance of the operation itself, he had demonstrated a model for frontier justice that could sustain itself without relying on legends or heroes. As Sarah departed, Fletcher returned to his workbench, where Isaiah Blackburn's watch now occupied a prominent position among the other memorials. He wound it precisely, adjusting its movement to match the exact moment when the outlaw leader had made his final, fatal miscalculation. Not a celebration of death, but acknowledgement of consequence. A mechanical reminder that even the most sophisticated predators eventually encounter systems they cannot overcome. Outside, the celebration continued into the night. But within Fletcher's shop, the rhythmic ticking of dozens of timepieces provided counterpoint to the watchmaker's methodical movements. Each represented an element in the complex mechanism he had assembled over 4 patient years, a mechanism that had functioned with precision when finally activated. The legend of Three Fingers Fletcher would grow with each retelling of the Blackburn defeat, though the man himself would soon depart Redemption Creek for his new role with the Justice Department. But his true legacy remained in the town itself, not as a monument to individual heroism, but as a template for community resilience against organized predation. In coming years, as the frontier gradually yielded to civilization, other towns, The Silent Trigger, Part 5, The Master Strategist. Triumphant Isaiah Blackburn had survived 23 gunfights, 7 prison breaks, and the bloody guerrilla campaigns of the Kansas border wars. He had developed an almost supernatural instinct for identifying the moment when a tactical situation shifted from salvageable to terminal. As he crouched behind a grain barrel in the livery stable, blood seeping through his fingers where Montgomery's bullet had shattered his shoulder, that instinct spoke with unmistakable clarity. The operation was lost. His remaining men, just 3 still capable of effective resistance, were pinned down with dwindling ammunition. The town he had marked for conquest had revealed itself as an elaborate trap. Most damning for the first time in the Blackburn. Gang's bloody history. They had been outmaneuvered not through luck or superior numbers, but through strategic foresight that bordered on precognition. Fletcher, he muttered, the name emerging like a curse. The Valentine's Day reckoning had become legendary among outlaws, not just for its body count, but for the methodical precision with which it had been executed. Some dismissed it as exaggeration. Frontier myth-making meant to intimidate. Isaiah had known better. He had studied the reports, visited the site himself during the gang's early days, analyzing the fields of fire and tactical positioning that had allowed one man to eliminate 19. The irony of falling victim to the same predator wasn't lost on him. In another life he might have appreciated the symmetry. Blackburn, Montgomery's voice carried across the stable. Your men are finished. James and Ezekiel are being intercepted as we speak. Matthew is already in custody. There's nowhere left to run. Isaiah's laugh held no humor. And I'm supposed to surrender? Allow myself to be paraded through town to the gallows? That's not how this story ends, Sheriff. Doesn't have to end with more bloodshed, Montgomery countered. Fletcher said you'd be offered fair treatment if you laid down arms. Fletcher. Isaiah spat the name. Where is the legendary manhunter, too cowardly to face me himself? A different voice answered, not Montgomery's, but one that carried the dry cadence of wind-blown prairie grass. Right here, Isaiah. Been here all along. Isaiah whirled toward the hayloft above, where a figure now stood silhouetted against the light filtering through cracks in the stable's roof. Fletcher had positioned himself before the confrontation began, anticipating exactly where the Blackburn leader would make his final stand. 7 years I've studied you, Isaiah, Fletcher continued, his voice conversational despite the charged circumstances. Learned your methods, your preferences, your tendencies under pressure. Did you know you always favor cover on your right side? Unconscious habit from that saber wound you took at Westport. Makes you predictable in confined spaces. The observation struck Isaiah like a physical blow. The wound Fletcher referenced had been sustained during his raider days, long before the Blackburn gang's rise to notoriety. That Fletcher knew such an intimate detail and had positioned his men to exploit it spoke to a level of preparation that transcended ordinary manhunting. You've turned this whole town into a killing ground, Isaiah realized aloud. Every building, every vantage point, every escape route, all designed to channel us exactly where you wanted. Fletcher nodded, visible now as he stepped forward into a shaft of dusty light. He held no weapon in his hands, a final insult that suggested Isaiah posed no meaningful threat despite the revolver still clutched in his grip. The town was already here, Fletcher corrected him. I merely helped it evolve into something more resistant to predators like you. Think of it as a form of community inoculation. Isaiah's eyes narrowed, calculating angles, distances, the likelihood of landing a killing shot before Montgomery's deputies could respond. The odds were beyond dismal, but the alternative, surrender, imprisonment, the ignominious end to the Blackburn legend, was unthinkable. Fletcher read his intention as clearly as if Isaiah had announced it. Before you make your final mistake, there's something you should know. He withdrew a pocket watch, holding it, where the light caught its polished surface. This belonged to Jack Parsons, the man whose operation you studied and improved upon when building your own criminal enterprise. He made the same calculation you're making now, in that box canyon. 7 years ago, thought he could beat impossible odds through sheer determination and skill. Isaiah's finger tightened imperceptibly on his trigger. Is this where you appeal to my better nature? Suggest surrender and redemption? His laugh was a harsh bark. You're wasting your breath. No appeal, Fletcher replied calmly. Merely an observation. Men like Parsons, like you believe yourselves exceptional, above natural law, beyond the constraints that govern ordinary lives. He tucked the watch away. That belief makes you dangerous, but it also makes you predictable. You'll choose death over surrender every time, because your legend matters more than your life. Isaiah's response was a blur of movement, rolling from cover, gun extended, firing with the deadly accuracy that had built his reputation across 4 territories. The bullet should have taken Fletcher squarely in the chest. Instead, it struck empty air. Fletcher had shifted position the instant before Isaiah moved, anticipating the exact trajectory of his attack. The countershot came not from Fletcher, but from Montgomery, positioned precisely where Fletcher had directed him minutes earlier. The sheriff's bullet caught Isaiah in the center of his torso, the impact lifting him off his feet before he collapsed onto the hay-strewn floor. The remaining Blackburn men, witnessing their leader's fall, lost whatever resolve had sustained them. Within moments, they had surrendered their weapons, emerging with hands raised into the lethal crossfire they had entered so confidently an hour earlier. Fletcher descended from the loft, approaching Isaiah's prone form with measured steps. The outlaw leader still breathed, though the spreading crimson stain across his shirt suggested this condition was temporary. His eyes, however, retained the fierce intelligence that had made him the architect of so many successful operations. "You beat us," Isaiah acknowledged, voice strained. "Completely. But you won't end the cycle. Someone else will rise to take our place. Nature abhors a vacuum, as you said yourself." Fletcher knelt beside him, speaking so only Isaiah could hear. "That's where you're wrong. The Blackburns weren't targeted because of your crimes alone. You were selected because your methodology was spreading, inspiring imitators, creating a contagion of tactical violence that threatened to transform the frontier." He withdrew a small notebook from his vest, filled with diagrams, observations, and tactical notes about the Blackburn operation. "By documenting exactly how you were defeated, I've created a template that other communities can follow. Your legacy won't be fear or respect. It will be a case study in how organized predation can be systematically dismantled by prepared citizenry." The realization in Isaiah's eyes that his life's work would become not legend but cautionary tale struck deeper than Montgomery's bullet. His lips formed one final question, blood flecking the corners of his mouth as he forced the words out. Worth it? All this for justice? The skepticism in his tone made the words sound like a naive fantasy. Fletcher's weathered face showed no triumph, only the weariness of a man who had seen too much violence to glorify its necessity. "Not justice," he corrected quietly. "Balance. The frontier doesn't need avenging angels or legendary lawmen. It needs communities strong enough to defend themselves against those who would prey upon them." As Isaiah's breathing slowed, Fletcher removed a timepiece from his pocket, not Parsons' watch, but a new one, unadorned and practical. He checked it against the angle of sunlight streaming through the stable roof, then wound it carefully before placing it in Isaiah's failing grip. "What's that for?" Montgomery asked, approaching as Fletcher stood. "A memorial," Fletcher replied, "and a reminder. Every life exists within constraints, even those who believe themselves exceptional." He surveyed the stable, where the Blackburn gang's final operation had dissolved into surrender and death. "We should check on Marshal Stone. If my calculations are correct, he'll have intercepted James and Ezekiel by now." On the Eastern Trail, those calculations had indeed proven accurate. Stone had allowed James and Ezekiel Blackburn to enter the narrow defile before taking action, ensuring they would have no practical route of escape. His first shot struck neither man, but instead impacted the trail directly before their horses, sending fragments of rock and dust into the air. "That was your warning," Stone's amplified voice echoed from the ridge above. "The next one won't be." The brothers reined their mounts to a halt, exchanging glances that communicated decades of shared experience. Their options had narrowed to a binary choice, surrender or die. Unlike Isaiah, however, they lacked his ideological commitment to legend. The Blackburns had always been pragmatists at heart. "Who's up there?" James called, squinting against the sun that positioned Stone in perfect shadow. "Show yourself." Stone remained silent, his rifle trained on the space between the brothers. Fletcher had provided specific instructions for this confrontation, instructions that, like everything else in his methodical plan, served multiple purposes. After 30 seconds of tense silence, Ezekiel's nerve broke. "For God's sake, James, they've got us dead to rights. Isaiah's probably already taken Montgomery's offer." The lie, strategic disinformation Fletcher had suggested, struck its target with precision. James Blackburn's confidence had always been predicated on his older brother's infallible leadership. The suggestion that Isaiah had surrendered undermined the psychological foundation of his resistance. "You have 10 seconds to drop your weapons," Stone announced. "After that, I start shooting. Unlike most lawmen you've encountered, I don't particularly care whether you surrender or not." The threat carried convincing weight, delivered in the dispassionate tone of a man who had long ago reconciled himself to the moral calculations of a frontier justice. James hesitated, measuring the likelihood of survival against the certainty of capture. 9 seconds. Ezekiel moved first, releasing his gun belt with shaking hands. "I'm out, James. It's over." 8. James Blackburn, who had killed 11 men in personal combat, who had once ridden 70 miles with a bullet lodged against his spine, who had built a reputation for unflinching courage in the face of overwhelming odds, found himself confronting a force more implacable than mere firepower. Here was the strategic genius that had engineered his brother's downfall, distilled into a countdown that stripped away all illusions of control or agency. 7. His gunbelt hit the dusty trail, followed by 2 concealed derringers and a Bowie knife. Within moments, both brothers stood disarmed, hands raised in the universal gesture of surrender. Stone descended the ridge with methodical caution, his rifle never wavering from its target. Only when both Blackburns were secured with the specialized restraints Fletcher had provided, crafted by the same hands that assembled fine timepieces, did he allow himself a moment of professional satisfaction. "Fletcher said you'd choose surrender once isolated from Isaiah's influence," he remarked, checking the restraints mechanisms. "Said your loyalty was genuine, but conditional on practical outcomes." Fletcher. Ezekiel pronounced the name with dawning comprehension. "3 fingers, Fletcher? He's supposed to be dead." "A common misunderstanding," Stone replied, securing them to their saddles for the ride back to town. "One he's found useful for his purposes." By mid-afternoon, the full scope of Fletcher's victory had become apparent. 21 members of the Blackburn gang were either dead or in custody. The bank remained secure, its actual holdings protected in the hidden vault, while the decoy safe showed evidence of tampering. Most remarkably, only 2 of Redemption Creek's defenders had sustained injuries, neither life-threatening, a testament to Fletcher's emphasis on positioning and tactical advantage over direct confrontation. In the sheriff's office, Matthew Blackburn sat in contemplative silence, watching as Montgomery and his deputies processed the surviving gang members. The youngest Blackburn had been granted a measure of freedom within the building, his arms restrained, but his legs unbound, another of Fletcher's calculated decisions. The watchmaker himself entered without ceremony, carrying the leather-bound journal in which he had documented the Blackburn operation from its inception. He placed it before Matthew, open to a page containing detailed observations about the youngest brother's psychological profile. Despite psychopathic tendencies similar to his siblings, subject demonstrates capacity for genuine reconsideration. Under specific circumstances, Matthew read aloud, his expression unreadable. Lacks Isaiah's ideological commitment to criminality. May be redirected if properly incentivized and isolated from fraternal influence. He looked up from the journal, meeting Fletcher's steady gaze. You've been planning this for years. Not just our capture, my specific rehabilitation. Fletcher nodded, taking a seat across from him. The Blackburn operation was never solely about punishment or prevention. Those are short-term solutions to systemic problems. What the frontier needs are individuals with your capabilities directed toward building rather than destroying. And you think I can be... what? Redeemed. The skepticism in Matthew's voice couldn't entirely mask his curiosity. Redemption is between you and whatever God you acknowledge, Fletcher replied. I'm offering something more pragmatic, a second chance that benefits us both. Your brothers will hang for their crimes. That outcome is inevitable, given the scale of their depredations. But you're young enough, anonymous enough, that alternatives exist. He outlined a proposition that left Matthew momentarily speechless. In exchange for testimony against the Blackburn gang's financial backers and political protectors, he would be granted a conditional pardon. Not freedom, Matthew harbored no illusions about that, but assignment to a specialized unit of the U.S. Marshals Service tasked with combating the very type of organized crime the Blackburns had perfected. You want me to hunt men like my brothers? The concept seemed absurd on its face. Why would I agree to that? Because deep down you recognize the truth they never could. Fletcher's voice carried no judgment, only the calm certainty of a man who had spent years studying his subject. The age that made their methods viable is ending. The frontier is closing. In 20 years, there will be no place left for men who live by the gun alone. He gestured toward the window, where Redemption Creek continued its daily routines despite the morning's violence. This is the future. Communities organized enough, prepared enough to defend themselves against predation. You can adapt to that reality or be consumed by it. Matthew's silence spoke volumes. Unlike his brothers, he had always possessed a calculating intelligence that transcended mere violence. Isaiah's charisma and James's courage had dominated the Blackburn legend, but it was Matthew's tactical insights that had refined their methodology over the years. I'll consider it, he said finally, not promising anything. Fletcher nodded, retrieving his journal. Fair enough. The Marshal Service representative arrives tomorrow. You have until then to decide. He rose to leave, then paused. One question, if you're inclined to answer. When did you first suspect that Redemption Creek wasn't what it appeared? A flicker of professional respect crossed Matthew's features. The watches in your shop window, too precisely arranged, like a coded message, made me wonder what else you were arranging with similar precision. He shrugged. Mentioned it to Isaiah, but he dismissed it, said I was being paranoid. A trait. That would have served him well, Fletcher observed. Paranoia is simply awareness without contextual understanding. By nightfall, news of the Blackburns' defeat had spread throughout the region via telegraph and word of mouth. The story grew, with each telling, how a seemingly ordinary watchmaker had transformed a quiet cattle town into an impenetrable fortress, how the notorious gang had walked into a trap years in the making, how frontier justice had finally caught up with men who had terrorized 4 territories. In Fletcher's shop, the regularity of ticking timepieces provided counterpoint to the excited conversations outside as townsfolk recounted their roles in the day's events. The watchmaker himself sat at his workbench, meticulously recording the final details of the operation in his journal. Each observation, each tactical decision, each outcome documented with the same precision he applied to his horological work. Maria Vasquez entered through the back door, having returned with her family from the mountain refuge once word reached them that the danger had passed. She carried a small cloth-wrapped package, which she placed gently on the bench beside him. "My father asked me to bring this," she said softly. "He says a man who fights devils should have protection." The cloth fell away to reveal the silver medal of San Miguel Arcangel she had carried during her warning mission that morning. Fletcher studied the medal with unexpected tenderness, turning it to catch the lamplight. "Thank him for me," he replied, "but I've had my fill of divine intervention. The truly miraculous aspects of today were human ones. Your courage, Montgomery's discipline, the community's cohesion under pressure." He returned to his journal, making a final notation. Maria, rather than departing, settled into a chair nearby, her curiosity finally overcoming the restraint she had maintained in their previous interactions. "The Blackburns," she began hesitatingly. "All those preparations, all that planning. You knew they would come specifically to Redemption Creek. How could you be so certain?" Fletcher's weathered face showed the ghost of a smile. "I wasn't targeting the Blackburns initially. I was creating a methodology, a systematic approach to community defense that could be replicated elsewhere." He closed the journal, running his fingers across its leather cover. The Blackburns simply represented the most sophisticated predators currently operating in the territories. By designing a system that could defeat them, I created a template, applicable to lesser threats as well. But why here? Why Redemption Creek? Because it had the necessary foundation, geographic position, economic significance, a community with potential for cooperation rather than division. Fletcher's gaze drifted to the window, where townspeople still gathered in animated clusters despite the late hour. And because its name suggested the possibility of second chances, something I've found myself contemplating more frequently in recent years. The conversation might have continued, but a knock at the front door interrupted. Marshal Stone entered without waiting for acknowledgement, his expression combining professional satisfaction with personal concern. "It's done," he announced. "Isaiah's body is with the undertaker. James and Ezekiel are secured in Montgomery's jail. The remainder will be transported to territorial custody tomorrow." Fletcher nodded, unsurprised by this report which aligned perfectly with his timetable. "And the watch I gave you for Isaiah?" "Set and running, as you instructed." Stone's eyes narrowed slightly. "Though I still don't understand the significance of that ritual." Fletcher rose, moving to the shelf where the row of memorial timepieces maintained their silent vigil. "Each represents a life I've taken in the course of my work," he explained, selecting an empty space where Isaiah's watch would eventually join the others. "Not trophies, but reminders that even justified killing exacts a cost from the killer." Stone studied the collection with new understanding, a way of maintaining your humanity while doing inhuman work. Something like that. Fletcher returned to his workbench, gathering the tools of his trade with the mechanical precision that characterized all his movements. The real question is, what comes next? The Blackburns have been neutralized, but the conditions that created them remain. Other predators will emerge to fill the void they leave behind. "You could continue your work," Stone suggested. "The techniques you've developed here, they could be applied elsewhere, adapted to communities facing similar threats." Fletcher's response was measured, each word emerging after careful consideration. "Perhaps. But there's another approach that might prove more effective in the long term." He withdrew a letter from his desk drawer, officially sealed correspondence bearing the mark of the Justice Department. "The government has expressed interest in formalizing my methods, creating a specialized unit within the Marshal Service focused on strategic approaches to frontier law enforcement." Stone's eyebrows rose. "They want to institutionalize your techniques?" "With modifications," Fletcher acknowledged. "Less emphasis on individual action, more on community preparation and coordinated response." "The frontier is changing, Ezekiel. The era of legendary manhunters and outlaw gangs is drawing to a close. What follows should be more systematic, less dependent on extraordinary individuals. Maria, who had listened to this exchange with rapt attention, found herself reconsidering the quiet watchmaker in yet another light. Not just a retired lawman with exceptional skills, but a visionary who had recognized the changing nature of the frontier itself. "Will you accept?" she asked. Fletcher's gaze returned to the row of memorial watches, each marking a life ended by his decisions and actions. "I'm considering it. The position would involve training rather than direct action, passing on knowledge rather than adding to this collection." Stone nodded, understanding the appeal this represented to a man who had seen too much bloodshed. "When do they need your answer?" "Soon. They're sending a representative to discuss details. Should arrive on tomorrow's stage." Fletcher's expression suggested this timing was neither coincidental nor unexpected. The Justice Department's interest had been another variable. In his elaborate calculations, anticipated and incorporated into his strategic framework. "And Matthew?" Stone inquired. "Montgomery mentioned you had special plans for the youngest Blackburn." "A calculated risk," Fletcher admitted, "but one with potential for substantial return. He possesses exceptional tactical intelligence combined with intimate knowledge of criminal methodology. Properly directed, those qualities could serve law enforcement more effectively than simple incarceration, would serve justice." The marshal's skepticism was evident, but he raised no direct objection. Fletcher's judgment, particularly regarding the psychological assessment of violent men, had proven remarkably accurate throughout their association. As Stone departed, Maria rose to leave as well, pausing at the door. "The town is planning a celebration tomorrow," she informed Fletcher, "to honor what you've done for Redemption Creek." The watchmaker nodded absently, already returned to the disassembly of a complex pocket watch movement. "Please convey my regrets. I'll be otherwise occupied when the stage arrives." After Maria's departure, Fletcher continued his work in solitude, the rhythmic ticking of dozens of timepieces creating a soothing counterpoint to the mechanical precision of his hands. The watch he repaired now had not been part of the elaborate trap that snared Matthew Blackburn, nor did it hold any strategic significance in the day's events. It was simply a timepiece brought in by a local rancher 3 days earlier, a mundane task he had set aside until the Blackburn operation reached its conclusion. There was comfort in returning to this routine work, in knowing that while extraordinary, challenges might require extraordinary measures. The underlying rhythm of life continued in its steady progression. Each tick of each second hand marked the transition from the violent past toward a more ordered future. For a man who had spent decades immersed in the brutal chaos of frontier justice, this regularity represented its own form of redemption. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.